welcome to the Caribbean Parenting Digital Show. This talk show is presented each week by host Alina Lewis and features guests from our Caribbean islands right here on this channel. As we discuss family finances, proverbial principles, child guidance, and academics at home, guests join in weekly to have conversations that give helpful tips about how to be a better parent. Like, subscribe, follow, and share as you tune in each week for new episodes of the Caribbean Parenting Digital Show. Hi, good day, and welcome to the Caribbean Parenting Digital Show. On this platform, we have conversations that give helpful tips about how to be a better parent each day. On this episode of the Caribbean Parenting Digital Show, we will be welcoming guest Rollocks as he shares with us about how we can create a living legacy. Now, most people think about legacy as something you leave behind or a benefit that occurs for others after you've lived your life. But we don't want to wait until after we've gone to create maximum impact. And this episode is all about how we can live in our legacy while we are here. And of course, Rawle is going to be joining us today, giving us tips on how we can create a living legacy too. Now, Rollocks has been in the field of training, consulting, and business coaching for over 20 years. He supported and led organizational transformation, change, and development consultancies for key and regional, local, and regional bodies. His core strengths converge at the crossroads of organizational development, transformational leadership, human development, and small business development. This has been his life's passion. And joining us today is none other than the founder and head coach at VisionWorks. Let's welcome Rollocks to our show. So Rawle, hi and good evening. How are you?
Hello, good evening.
Hi. How have you been keeping?
Great.
And in our COVID word,
looking forward.
You.
Yes,
so I'm
yes.
so excited to have you here. Talking about understanding
and welcome
legacy.
And welcome to your guests and all those tuning in. Yes. Parents are like myself. This is definitely a topic that I think about every day.
Yes. And so we're reminding parents, even as you talk about tuning in, we are reminding parents that you can follow us online on our Facebook page, Caribbean Parenting. And you should also subscribe to our YouTube channel where you're going to get live notifications using the tag Caribbean Parenting as well, because on these digital platforms, you're definitely going to be in store for great content, great information every week as we tune in together. So Rawle, today we're chatting about understanding legacy, and to a greater extent, we're talking about creating a living legacy. So firstly, of course, I want you to be able to share with us what is a living legacy all about? And how do we create a living legacy?
Well, there are numbers of things for us to kind of set as a foundation, as we get into the discussion. And you're correct. Establishing what a legacy is, particularly a living legacy, is important if we are able to be intentional about it. And I think that's really the issue here, because when it comes to leaving a legacy, we really don't have a choice. You understand? Regardless of what we do, we're going to leave some type of legacy as parents for children, and we are doing it, right? So therefore, the type of legacy that we leave depends on us and the things that we do as parents, right? Of course, you mentioned earlier a traditional definition that spoke to leaving something when you're gone, whether it's money or property, Essentially, and I want to put this at the start of the conversation, a legacy isn't so much what you leave for people that come behind, but what you leave in people. All right? So it's deposits that you make while you're alive. And in fact, another definition says that a living legacy really has to do with living a life that's worth imitating. All right? Because this is how it catches on. So the working definition I would like to put forward is that a legacy is a collection of values and valuables that we leave for persons who are dear to us, who follow us, who are influenced by our presence and what we do. In that case, values pertain to the stories, the core values, those spiritual values, moral values, the experiences. All these things are things, the valuables that we leave, the values that we leave. Of course, there are valuables which pertain to the assets, spiritual, physical, financial assets that we leave behind as well, and even while we are alive. So that's a nice working definition that we'd want to keep in mind. And essentially, these become seeds that we invest into the future, right? Of course, this legacy is passed on in different ways. It's passed on visually by what people see us do, orally by what they hear, right, by what we say, physically in terms of what we give, all right, and of course, written. I was just recently in a discussion where a psychologist was talking about even things like trauma, psychological legacies. So there are these things that we leave within our family setting that go on from one generation to the next, right? There's a very important quote that helps here when it comes to leaving a legacy, because we need to know why it's important. One famous writer, German writer, said that we should choose well, right? Even though our choice is brief, it is yet civilization as we know it. It helps to guard against a cycle of debt and poverty, as well as preserve some of the best elements of who we are, all right? And I like to give a little example about the life of Jonathan and Sarah Edwards. And we have many examples like these around us. But I thought this was really interesting. So in their lives, Jonathan and Sarah Edwards, they had 11 children and invested a lot of time with the children, explaining things about life and how they should live and what they should do. Someone did some research, and in the years following, out of their life and out of their the life that they live, came 100 lawyers, 80 persons that held public office, 66 physicians, 65 professors of colleges, 30 judges, and it goes on and on and on. So that's an example of a legacy and a living legacy. When it comes to some of the financial aspects that are also important, we recognize that oftentimes on the financial side, up to 70%, and one study is saying that, of what we accumulate as parents, only 30% really goes on, right, to the next generation, right? And it gets even worse as we go to the third and fourth generations. So for all those reasons, we have to be very conscious about the value of a legacy. And in fact, we live those experiences today, right? We know the challenges that we face in our lives because maybe something wasn't handed down to us, or we didn't see a certain type of example. So those things are important to recognize, right, Alina?
Yes, definitely. But even as you talk about different aspects of legacy role, can you share a bit with us about how, as individuals and especially as parents, we can take action towards creating a living legacy? Because, of course, even as I was sharing earlier, we're recognizing that creating that living legacy is about being able to maximize that legacy in the now while we're alive, and not just looking at after we've died, this is what we leave for our kids, but being able to maximize it in the now. So can you share with our audience how we can actively take action towards creating that living legacy?
There are two things I'd like to share essentially.
Yeah.
We have to reflect on our life and what we do all the time. And we also have to become intentional. All right? And these are some things that I've considered as a parent, and I believe parents should consider, right? What do you want your life to stand for? Right? These are some of the questions you need to really sit and ponder, right? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Do what we call a personal SWOT. All right? How do you want to be remembered? What kind of life would you like your family to live? All right? What about people beyond that circle? How do you want to be remembered? What kind of impact do you want to leave? All right? Whose life do you want to touch? What do you want to leave behind? Right? How can you serve? These are some very important questions to answer as we begin charting a course of leaving an intentional legacy. Right, Alina?
Yes, definitely. And so even as persons reflect on living that legacy, being intentional, you mentioned something earlier, and I'm thinking there may be members of our audience may not necessarily understand it. They may not have heard the term before. You mentioned doing a SWOT of your life. Can you go a
Yes.
bit for persons who maybe haven't come across that term before? Can you go a bit more in depth to explain when it comes to being intentional about how we live and what we create as parents? What does it really mean to do a SWOT in our life? And how do we, on an everyday basis, connect that to living in a place of legacy and creating legacy?
Yes, we have to acknowledge that it's more than just accumulating things in life. As I said, the definition speaks to what we leave in individuals. And a good starting place is looking at our own life. So a SWOT really stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. In other words, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are the opportunities that present themselves as a result of those strengths and weaknesses? And what are the threats that I face? So a family may be living in a particular situation, or you may be living in a particular country, or you may be your particular career, all right? Brings to it various issues and challenges that you have to treat with. Some things that were passed on to you, both negative and positive. You have to kind of take stock of these things and look at how you can build on the strengths and mitigate the weaknesses, because quite a lot of these things are the things that we pass on. All right. So we not only pass on some of our strengths, we pass on some of these weaknesses as well. So anything that we can do to bolster ourselves is an excellent place to start, and it's what helps in that regard.
So is it then what we're saying, Rawle, that when as parents we start thinking about creating that living legacy, it's really about taking stock then of who we are, paying attention to who we are,
Yes.
what we're good at,
Yes.
what we're
Yes.
challenged by, what opportunities
Yes.
there are for us to do more, create avenues for our kids,
Yes.
what threatens
Yes.
maybe our family life, family stability, that kind of thing. And then
Yes.
once we do that, you're saying we're creating legacy. But break it down for us a bit further. After we've taken stock of these strengths and weaknesses, and we say, now we want to create legacy, what exactly is it that we are creating?
Well, there's something I'd want us to consider before I answer that question, right? Remember, we did talk about how this is passed on. All right. Definitely, we have to look at once we've assessed ourselves and we looked at the challenges that we face and arriving at where we arrived today. We then have to consider, how do I pass this on? How do I leave these best examples? How do I communicate this? All right. And that's a good place to start. How do I communicate the best values of the past and strengthen? So when we talk about this legacy, how do I put these values? How can I encapsulate this and deliver this to my those that come behind? So some of the things we need to consider, especially with parents as younger children living today, things related to the generational gap. That's a big issue. Some parents find it difficult to be able to translate those values, right? Particularly because as parents, we try to shield our children from some of those past negative experiences, which brought us the values.
Yeah.
So how can we create a situation where they learn without some of the most negative parts of our experiences? So to do this, we have to understand that we have to communicate, not just express, which means we have to be able to share it in a way that they understand and we get feedback about what they understand. And this is done in different ways, right? I know of some families that are able to set up a family mission statement.
Okay,
where
but
they
Mr.
sit and
Rollocks,
assess.
if you would allow me, please allow me, even before you start getting into the ways, I wanted to ask, is it fair to say then that when you start thinking about legacy, and creating that living legacy, what we're really talking about is establishing our values and what we hold dear to us.
Yes, yes. So that goes back to our definition. The foundation was that, remember, I said the legacy is a collection of values and valuables that we leave behind. So that process of self-reflection, doing this what, thinking about what we want to do in life, the impact we want to make, encapsulates those values. So yes, that is really
Yeah.
what we take in. And sometimes parents are not very clear on it. We have some idea, but if you
Mhm.
take the time to make a note of it, and I encourage parents to write, and that's where we were getting to the point of the family mission statement. As you begin to write, those values become clear, the ones that you want to pass on, all right, to your
I
children. So
understand
definitely,
that.
yeah.
But you know what I wanna sort of mention and ask at the same time? For the parent that has never really thought about legacy in the context within which we are sharing in this episode, can you just take a moment to clarify or bring to light why parents should deem it as necessary or important to consider? I need to establish my values. I need to establish my values with the home. What is the impact that sort of living legacy gonna have on whether the spousal relationship or the parent-child relationship or even the family unit as a whole? Could you take a minute and just speak to that?
Well, I can draw from personal experience. When growing up, especially where I grew up, all right, and the challenges I face in a place like Mova, you think about those things that impact your ability to live a decent life, to maintain proper relationships, all right. So as you begin to ponder these things as a parent, you look at your children, and for me as a parent, definitely, I want to ensure that my family life is intact. I want to ensure that the best parts of our family life live on. I want to ensure that my children and those that come after me can live, right? They can live prosperously, you understand? And those are the things that propel me to take a deep dive into trying to understand, because I know my challenges, all right? And I wouldn't like to pass the same challenges on. I would definitely want to be able to give a hand up, you understand, to those that come behind. So for those reasons, it's very important. So legacy impacts upon everything, and impacts upon our quality of life every day, the relationships with our children, the relationship with our spouse, the impact we have in our community. So it touches upon every aspect of life. It's all around us. And we could find, or children can find themselves in a difficult situation if we don't pay attention to intentionally passing on the best values.
So even as we consider that, yes, we've established what legacy is all about. We've established that we need to take stock, look at our strengths, our weaknesses, what challenges us, take control, establish our values. You mentioned communicating. How then, when we pivot on communicating and so on, are we going to be able as parents to share our legacy? Who do we need to share the legacy with? And how do we
Yes.
share legacy?
Well, it comes through what we say and what we do. All right. This happens all the time. What we're trying to establish here as leaving a living legacy is that we have to be intentional about it. And I've experienced it. I'm sure many parents out there, persons out there listening, would have seen it too. Things like I mentioned just before we got into it, the idea of the family mission statement. That's one way. Something that you sit down where you look at your core values, you look at the best things that you want to preserve, it's the goals that you're going after as a family, and you put these things down and you have a discussion on it. So things like family meetings, all right, where we meet and we discuss those things that pertinent, that are valuable. I know of an individual who would share from time to time how his family came to be, the challenges they had to overcome, and he has it almost as a tradition where they would sit and they would talk about this is why we are here today. These were the challenges we had to overcome. And as a family, you can do better. So family meetings, family dinners, family time together. All right. Of course, we can get into other sessions. Writing things like a will and so forth is another way, all right, of demonstrating to others what we want to leave behind. All right. Our involvement as well in community life, in national life, is another way as well that we communicate to our children a number of values, the importance of working together, the importance of citizenship, the importance of giving back. These are all the ways that we communicate those things that are important to us as far as the legacy is concerned.
Totally understood. So even as we continue on with our chat, which is so informative and well needed, one of the things that I'm looking forward for you sharing are the avenues for impact in terms of how does the legacy now help us to carry on? Because of course, we're emphasizing to our audience that it's so important to create that living legacy, to live in it, to maximize life. And you know, when we think about maximizing life, we're thinking about we're maximizing for impact. So could you take that moment then to now share with us what are the avenues for impact that exist when we intentionally choose to establish those values to create that living legacy?
Yeah, that Alina is exciting, and the avenues are limited by our creativity. There's no limit really, right? As creative as we can be, all right? So there are some examples that I can share that have worked for some families. For those of you that like to write or can write, writing a memoir, all right, is one way, or videotaping a memoir, all right? Doing a videotape where you talk about your life, creating a scrapbook, all right? I came across one example in a TEDx presentation called 10 by 3 by 3, which basically says you can write 10 think of 10 questions that people ask you all the time over your life, all right? Think about the answer to those questions. Think about 3 important stories that bring out the value of those answers that you give, and 3 important lessons that come from it. So in the area of writing, those are things we can do. Write a legacy letter, all right? I spoke earlier about the mission statement. You can start a blog, all right? You can write a book, all right? You can keep a journal. I know some families have been able to do that. They kept a journal, a daily journal, a weekly journal, an annual journal, and this was something that the family could keep, all right? You could think about what you want to leave behind in terms of heirlooms, things that are very important, special pictures, special things, valuables around the house that are symbolic, right, of the value that you want to leave, the pictures that you take and how you keep them down, right? Things like special family recipes, right? And I'm talking about things that are easy to reach, within individuals' reach, all right? Of course, the other ways to make an impact is to be a good role model, all right? Be a mentor, all right? Work with children in the area, all right? Volunteer, advocate for a cause, start a business, right? Join a non-profit organization and contribute your time. You can even think about programs you want to start in your community. There's so much need right now for mentoring of young men, all right? Decide to mentor young men or young girls. All these are some of the things that you can do, all right? I know some individuals who have the ability to have left a scholarship at their primary school or the secondary school, something that will help another child in some ways. And a scholarship can be anything. It can be books for the next term, all right? And all these are things you want to do and make sure your family know about it. And better yet, if they can be involved when you do these things, all right? It can even be skills and know-how. There are particular baking bread, you understand? Or making or carpentry or woodwork. All these things are things that you can pass on and can have tremendous impact on your family and generations to come. So Alina, these are just some of the areas that you can have impact.
Oh, this is such great information. Now, we want to go into our Q&A because, of course, we've been taking questions from parents and just points that they're interested in as it pertains to legacy. So we're going to go into that Q&A section now. And our first question says, when do we start thinking about forming a living legacy? Is it when I get married or is it when I get pregnant? So that's our question for now.
That's a great question. All right. I would say you begin thinking about leaving a legacy when you begin thinking. All right. So as from the time you become conscious, you start thinking about the kind of legacy. So in other words, begin with the end in mind. And a popular writer, author Stephen Covey would have said this so many times. When you begin to establish that, and this takes a while and it's an ongoing process, it's not something cast in stone. Then you work your way back. All right. So even before marriage, you can start thinking about the legacy, which informs the life that you live. It informs the choices that you make. All right. It informs the things that you get involved in as a single person. So way before getting married, all right, we can start thinking about it so we can begin to live the life, all right, that would lead to the kind of legacy we want to leave behind.
You know, even as you were saying that, I was thinking, um, the question is interesting as it says, when should I start leaving a legacy? Is it when I get married? Is it when I get pregnant? And I know that here on the Caribbean Parenting Digital Show, we're emphasizing in the context of the Caribbean parent. But even as I glean from what you're sharing, Rawle, is it fair to say for those single people that may be listening on, that leaving a legacy is not only for parents, not only for people who are married or with children, but based on what you're saying, having that living legacy is really about understanding what your values are, what you're passionate concerning, and really deciding how you want to cause impact in the world or within your sphere, that it's not bound only to family life. Is that fair to say?
Certainly. You see, it does take some time to work out those core values that are important to you. Some
Yeah.
persons just have it, some persons take some time. And it takes some time to build those values within yourself, because when you think about it, what we started in our definition by saying it's a life worth imitating. That is what leaving a legacy is. So if, as an individual, you don't hone those skills and those values, all right, and you wait until you have family or you become a parent, you see what's happening here. So while you're trying to pass on, you're trying to understand yourself. You want to be at a place where when family comes along, when a wife or husband comes along, you've already thought through these things, because it becomes easier to communicate and easier to live, so that you're not practicing on your children. Or these are values that you've honed, these are values that you've seen work for you, and you don't have to be testing it out when you get married.
Awesome. So we see that mummies, daddies, aunties, uncles, while this is the Caribbean Parenting Digital Show, encourage your young adults, your unmarried ones, your ones and family members who don't even have kids as yet, encourage them to tune in, because we're seeing that the information that is being shared is of value to all. So this is great. Let's go on to our next question. Our next question says, what can I do if my family feels that leaving a legacy is not important?
Yes, and this good question, and this, I think, this is a challenge I was alluding to when I said earlier, in communication, there's a generation gap, all right? And it's difficult, as you would imagine, for younger persons, especially who grew up in this quick fire world, to understand a lot of things that we want to communicate to them. So it means really you have to find a number of different ways to communicate value, and you have to be consistent. And it's not that they're going to get it all at once, but you need to be consistent and find creative ways of doing so, bringing them along. All right. I can remember going kicking and screaming to do several tasks with my dad, right? But because I went over time, I was able to inculcate it. So I think you have to be creative. For example, I know I've been trying to get my son to understand what it means to be disciplined. So how do I communicate this value? This is an important legacy I want to leave behind. All right. He told me he's into YouTube.
Right.
And he wants to do a YouTube channel. So I took that thing that he loved, and I was able to create the lessons. Okay, if you're going to do this YouTube, this is what is important. This is what you have to do. And that is the way he got it. All right. When I was able to relate it to something that he understood, and that's a big part of the communication that's needed. So this demands creativity. Sometimes you may be out playing basketball with them or having some fun activity. And when you've caught them in that mood, that's an excellent time to begin to make the references and draw the links so they can see, this is what mommy or daddy meant. Right?
I understand.
Great question.
Yeah, so we have two more questions, Rawle. I think this is our third question. What advice do you want to leave persons who want to start leaving a legacy. So I guess maybe this parent, I'm not sure who would have written it, but maybe what they're trying to figure out is, what advice do you have to get started? How do we get started? We want to leave it. How do we get started in, I guess, creating the legacy? Because we have to create it before we leave it, yeah?
Yes,
So what
yes,
advice would you
yes.
give? I know you spoke about the SWOT. I know you spoke about mission. But is there like a general understanding that you could share with our audience in that regard?
For sure, I would say there's no one size that fits all right? Each person has to look at their individual, their situation, and assess their whys, why they do what they do, right? Why is it important to them? Ask themselves some deep questions about why they do what they do. That's an excellent starting point for anyone, all right? One of the best advice I would give is translate that into something written. All right. There's a scripture I like to refer to sometimes in the Bible that talks about write the vision and make it plain. So he that reads it can run with it. And the idea really is that as you begin that process of writing, it helps to clarify some of the thoughts that you have in your mind. All right, about the values and the valuables you want to leave behind. You may write something down and realize, hey, this is not really what I want to say. All right, and then that encourages you to do research. So I think thinking about your purpose, thinking about your whys, thinking about the impact you want to make, and then begin writing in whatever form, whether you want to journal, whether you want to do a blog, whatever form you want to do a letter. All right.
Yeah.
This is an important way to go. There's an interesting example I want to share quickly. Yeah. I know one parent, and we have many examples like this online, where every day the parent did almost like a video log and just shared. This is an easy thing to do. You understand? Just start sharing and start recording it. And they left this behind as something for their children. Anyone can do it.
Yeah, and a final question on this question is, how do you bridge the generation gap? And I'm guessing this is meant in the context of communicating your legacy, because the question is saying old people used to have their sayings, but young people now are more into technology. So how do we find the balance? I think is maybe what this parent is trying to ask. When it comes to creating the legacy, living the legacy, and especially communicating that legacy, when you look at the generation gap between how maybe the older persons communicate versus how younger people communicate.
Younger persons
What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's I'd say it's a work in progress, because this is something myself I am dealing with. I do believe, though, there's a quotation by Covey that's instructive. It says, seek first to understand, then be understood. Yeah. So the best way of communicating is to understand who you're going to communicate to. So it means that you have to spend, I know it can be a little tedious and challenging, you have to spend some time in their world, trying to understand the things that they value and why they value it and what's important for them. For example, a cell phone means something totally different to someone who's a little older. For a young person, a cell phone is everything. Yeah. It's their dictionary, it's their recorder, it's their voice recorder, it's their movie, it's their library, it's their school. So just think about that. So think about what it means when you take away a cell phone from a child. You have to understand what's going through. So I would say spend some time to understand that child's world, understand where they're at, what makes them tick, and begin even understanding some of the language. LOL. You have to put in some of that, talk to you later, all these things that I'm learning myself. And as you begin to break it down and speak that kind of language, it opens them up, all right, to hear, right, to listen and to hear. Then you add to that creativity. Find different ways to communicate. There are all kinds of ways, and it doesn't have to be a sit-down meeting. It could be while you're cooking. It could be while you're having fun. It could be while you're taking a walk. There's so many ways to communicate, all right? Yeah. Getting them in that mode is important.
Oh, totally understand. So that was a great Q&A. And I think that our audience would have left with a lot of interesting points and so on. But that was really great. So even now, Mr. Rollocks, we want to give the opportunity to really shine a spotlight on VisionWorks solutions, even as you lead and you represent VisionWorks. So even as we think about legacy and the works of VisionWorks solutions. Can you share with our audience what does VisionWorks do to support persons in building a legacy, creating a legacy? Could you take a moment and share on this?
Sure, sure. I spent over 20 years as a coach and a consultant looking at the gap divide between business and the life that we live and the life we want to live. And I've always felt that these two can coexist, all right? People can be prosperous, businesses can be profitable, while at the same time making life better. Because that's the purpose of our work and our career and being involved in business and enterprise, to make life better. And when there's that divide, we ask ourselves, what's the reason why? All right? Are we really having the impact that we need to? So as an organization, VisionWorks is focused on helping to create the solutions that bridge that gap. All right? So we have solutions that focus on 3 areas. Solutions that focus on individuals, solutions that focus on small businesses, and as well as solutions that focus on the corporate entity. For individuals, we help them to understand that yes, you can pursue career, but you can manage life harmoniously. All right? This whole question of work-life balance, we talk about it all the time. There's so many demands that a parent has today. All right? So much stuff to learn. So they need to earn a living. They need to manage schoolwork. There's so much to do. How do we put this together? So VisionWorks helps individuals with a range of solutions to help bridge this gap. Businesses have the same challenge, right? We need to spend time doing our business, but at the same time, we need to spend time working on our business. So working on our business and working in our business is something that we need to balance, all right? So we also provide solutions that help businesses do this and become more profitable and sustainable profits, all right? For corporate entities, it's a similar challenge. We have to make profits. We have to keep our employees engaged, but we have to manage our stakeholders. We have to manage shareholders, all right? All these things can present a great challenge for corporate entities. So we help corporate entities develop programs to ensure that there's a balance in the work that they do, from strategic planning to change management to remodeling the organizations. This is the kind of work we get in to ensure that there's impact. So we focus on impact on every level, at the individual level, at the small business level, and at the corporate level.
Oh, this is awesome. So, Rawle, I appreciate you so much for taking time to join us at this digital show, Caribbean Parenting. We thank you for all the information that you've done. And mummies, daddies, aunties, uncles, please know that Mr. Rollocks is going to be with us yet again later down for another episode as he touches on yet another critical element of legacy, where we look at financial legacy specifically. So definitely tune in for updates so that you could be sure to get this info, to tune in, ask your questions and so on. So Mr. Rollocks, thank you so much for joining in with us. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you for taking time to tune in to the Caribbean Parenting Digital Show. Streamed bi-weekly, we look forward to having you join us every Wednesday and Sunday as we have conversations about topics that impact and support effective parenting. If you have not yet done so, be sure to like, subscribe, and share with others. So until next time, I am your host, Alina Lewis, and I thank you for joining us today for yet another edition of the Caribbean Parenting Digital Show.